The most catastrophic diplomatic failure in galactic history began with a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning and a bureaucrat named Quirble Fizzlebottom, who had never, in his entire 47-year career with the Galactic Diplomatic Corps, encountered a species quite so aggressively incompetent at following simple instructions. Quirble stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel Reasonable Discourse, clutching his regulation clipboard with the kind of desperate intensity usually reserved for people clinging to life rafts in shark-infested waters. His three eyes were darting frantically between his paperwork and the small blue planet rotating peacefully below, blissfully unaware that it was about to become the subject of Form 847C, Preliminary Assessment of Primitive Civilizations with Potential for Moderate Intelligence. Status report, Fizzlebottom," barked Captain Graxel Boomwhiskers, whose name was far more intimidating than his actual appearance, which resembled a cross between a worried accountant and a very large hamster wearing military insignia. "Well, sir," Quirble began, his voice carrying the particular strain that comes from having spent the last 6 months preparing for this moment. "According to our long-range observations, the inhabitants of this world, designation Earth, appear to have developed rudimentary technology, basic social structures, and what our anthropologists optimistically describe as primitive yet endearing attempts at civilization." What Quirble did not know, because the Galactic Diplomatic Corps had the collective foresight of a particularly short-sighted mole, was that humans had a unique talent for turning the simplest situations into elaborate disasters with the efficiency of a perfectly designed chaos machine. Down on Earth, in a facility that the humans had grandly named the International First Contact Preparedness Center, but which was actually a hastily converted conference room in Geneva with a broken air conditioner and coffee that could strip paint, Dr. Millicent Crankworth was having what she would later describe as the mother of all panic attacks. Dr. Crankworth, whose expertise in xenolinguistics was matched only by her talent for catastrophic overthinking, was staring at a computer screen displaying what appeared to be the most complex mathematical equation ever conceived, transmitted by the approaching alien vessel. The equation covered 17 pages when printed out and included symbols that looked suspiciously like what would happen if ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs had a violent collision with advanced calculus and decided to have nightmares together. "They want us to solve this?" Dr. Crankworth exclaimed, her voice reaching frequencies that made the nearby coffee cups vibrate sympathetically. "This isn't mathematics. This is abstract art having an existential crisis." General Winston Bumblebee, whose name had been the source of considerable military embarrassment throughout his career, was pacing back and forth with the sort of purposeful stride that people use when they want to look decisive, but have absolutely no idea what they're supposed to be deciding about. "Doctor, please tell me you have some idea what these aliens want from us," General Bumblebee said, his mustache twitching with barely contained anxiety. "Well," Dr. Crankworth replied, adjusting her glasses with the precise movement of someone who was about to deliver spectacularly unhelpful news, "based on my preliminary analysis, I believe they're asking us to prove our intelligence by solving this equation, which appears to be, oh dear." "Oh dear? What do you mean, oh dear?" "I mean, General, that this equation seems to be asking us to calculate the exact number of thoughts that a philosophical butterfly would have if it could contemplate the meaning of existence while flying backwards through time." The silence that followed this statement was the kind of profound quiet that usually precedes either enlightenment or complete mental breakdown. In this case, it was leaning heavily toward the latter. Meanwhile, aboard the Reasonable Discourse, Quirble Fizzlebottom was discovering that his carefully prepared first contact protocol was beginning to unravel with the systematic precision of a sweater caught in a blender. The humans had been silent for exactly 2 hours and 47 minutes, which according to Section 12B of the Galactic First Contact Manual meant one of 3 things. They were either preparing a profoundly wise response, having a collective nervous breakdown, or had all simultaneously decided to take a nap. "Sir," announced Communications Officer Blipworth Twiddle, whose job it was to monitor human broadcasts and who had been having increasingly concerning realizations about Earth's population, "I'm detecting massive amounts of communication activity from the planet's surface. However, it appears to consist primarily of something called memes and repeated references to pizza and cats." Captain Boomwhiskers frowned, his whiskers twitching with confusion. "Memes. Are these some sort of philosophical concepts?" I don't think so, sir. One of them appears to be a picture of a small feline creature accompanied by text reading, "Icon has cheeseburger," and I'm reasonably certain this is not a response to our mathematical inquiry. Back on Earth, the situation had deteriorated from mildly concerning to completely bonkers, with the smooth efficiency of a well-oiled disaster machine. Dr. Crankworth had been joined by Professor Reginald Wobblethwaite, the world's leading expert in theoretical impossibility, who was staring at the alien equation with the expression of a man who had just discovered that his entire life's work had been rendered obsolete by what appeared to be cosmic practical joke. "This is extraordinary," Professor Wobblethwaite exclaimed, bouncing up and down with the enthusiasm of a caffeinated kangaroo. "Do you realize what this equation represents?" "Please tell me it represents something that makes sense," Dr. Crankworth pleaded. "It represents the most sophisticated joke in the history of mathematics. They're asking us to solve an equation that calculates the probability of impossibility while simultaneously proving that the answer doesn't exist. It's brilliant." General Bumblebee looked back and forth between the two scientists with the expression of a man who was beginning to suspect that the aliens might not be the strangest beings he'd encountered today. "So, are you saying they're joking with us?" "Oh no, General," Professor Wobblethwaite replied cheerfully. "I don't think they realize it's a joke, which makes it even more hilarious. This revelation might have led to productive diplomatic breakthrough, if not for the arrival of Dr. Prudence Snodgrass, the Director of Interplanetary Relations, who burst into the room carrying a stack of papers thick enough to serve as furniture and wearing the expression of someone who had just discovered that bureaucracy was somehow even more complicated than she'd previously imagined. "Terrible news, everyone," Dr. Snodgrass announced, with the particular enthusiasm that only career bureaucrats can muster when discussing administrative disasters. "I've been researching first contact protocols, and according to the 17 different international treaties on the subject, we're supposed to respond using the universal mathematical language for interspecies communication, which was developed in 1987 by a committee that apparently consisted entirely of people who had never seen mathematics before." She slammed the papers down on the table with a thud that made everyone jump. "The good news is that I found the manual. The bad news is that it's written in a mathematical notation that was declared theoretically impossible by MIT in 1993. Up in space, Quirble Fizzlebottom was beginning to experience what his species called diplomatic anxiety disorder, which manifested as an irresistible urge to reorganize his paperwork while making small, whimpering sounds. "Sir," he reported to Captain Boomwhiskers, "the humans have now been silent for exactly 3 hours. According to regulations, we should interpret this as either profound contemplation or complete bewilderment." "Which do you think it is, Fizzlebottom?" Quirble considered this question while watching several more meme transmissions flash across his communication screen, including one that appeared to show a human making an absurd facial expression while text proclaimed, "Aliens, okay, but do they like pizza?" "I'm beginning to suspect, sir, that humans might operate according to logic systems that our diplomatic training did not adequately prepare us for." This was, as it turned out, the understatement of the millennium. Down on Earth, the first contact team had reached the point where they were seriously considering responding to the alien mathematical equation with the only thing that seemed appropriate: complete honesty about their absolute bewilderment. Dr. Crankworth had spent the last hour trying to compose a response that would convey the message, "We have no idea what you're talking about, but we're really trying our best," in mathematical terms. Her current attempt looked like someone had asked a calculator to have an emotional breakdown. "What if," suggested Professor Wobblethwaite, with the dangerous enthusiasm of a man who had just had what he considered a brilliant idea, "we respond with our own impossible equation, something equally ridiculous?" "That's insane!" Dr. Crankworth exclaimed. "Exactly! It's so insane that it might actually work." General Bumblebee, who had been following this conversation with the expression of a man watching his sanity pack its bags and head for the exit, held up his hands. Wait! Are you suggesting that we respond to aliens with mathematical nonsense?" "Not nonsense, General," Professor Wobblethwaite corrected with academic precision. "Sophisticated nonsense. There's a difference." And so, in what would later be recorded in galactic history books under the chapter titled "How Not to Conduct Diplomacy," the humans transmitted their response: an equation that calculated the exact emotional state of the number 7 when it discovered that it wasn't actually a number at all, but rather a confused letter that had gotten lost on its way to becoming part of the alphabet. The response hit Quirble Fizzlebottom's communication console with the impact of a small mathematical meteorite. He stared at the transmission for several long moments, his 3 eyes growing progressively wider as he tried to process what he was seeing. "Captain," he said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, I think they've just challenged us to a contest of philosophical impossibility." "What does that mean, Fizzlebottom?" "I have absolutely no idea, sir, but according to Article 847B of the Diplomatic Corps Manual, when faced with incomprehensible responses from primitive civilizations, we're required to interpret them in the most favorable light possible." Captain Boomwhiskers consulted his own manual, flipping through pages with increasing desperation. "And what exactly constitutes the most favorable light possible when dealing with mathematical impossibilities?" "Well, sir," Quirble replied, "I believe we're supposed to assume they're demonstrating advanced philosophical sophistication beyond our current understanding. This might have led to a peaceful resolution if not for the arrival of Admiral Pompington Stufflebottom, the Galactic Diplomatic Corps' leading expert on dealing with primitive species who think they're clever." Admiral Stufflebottom had been monitoring the first contact from his flagship and had come aboard the Reasonable Discourse to personally oversee what he was convinced would be a simple, straightforward, diplomatic triumph. Admiral Stufflebottom was the sort of being who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved by following regulations more strictly, and he brought to first contact situations the same enthusiasm that most people reserve for organizing their sock drawers. "Report, Captain!" Admiral Stufflebottom boomed, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been wrong about anything because he had never encountered a situation that wasn't covered by official procedures. "Well, sir," Captain Boomwhiskers began carefully, "the humans have responded to our intelligence test with what appears to be either advanced philosophical humor or complete mathematical insanity." Admiral Stufflebottom examined the human transmission with the confident air of someone who was about to solve everything with superior knowledge and proper procedures. His expression gradually changed from confidence to confusion to what could only be described as intellectual panic. This is impossible," he declared. "According to my calculations, what they've sent us is mathematically equivalent to asking whether the color blue has feelings about Thursday." "Yes, sir," agreed Quirble nervously. "We've established that it's impossible. The question is, what do we do about it?" Admiral Stufflebottom consulted his regulation book, flipping pages with increasingly frantic energy. According to Section 23C, when primitive civilizations demonstrate impossible mathematics, we're required to... Oh no. What is it, sir? According to regulations, mathematically impossible responses are classified as either signs of advanced intelligence that we don't understand, or as acts of deliberate mockery designed to insult our intellectual capabilities. The silence that followed this statement was broken only by the gentle humming of the ship's engines and the sound of Querble's clipboard hitting the floor. "So," Captain Boomwhiskers said slowly, "how do we tell the difference?" "According to the manual," Admiral Stufflebottom replied in a voice that suggested he was reading his own death sentence, "we ask them to clarify their intentions." Back on Earth, the first contact team was experiencing what Dr. Crankworth would later describe as the calm before the storm of absolute confusion. They had sent their response and were now waiting for the aliens to either applaud their creativity or declare war on them for being mathematically ridiculous. "Do you think they understood our equation?" Professor Wobblethwaite asked with the hopeful tone of someone who was beginning to suspect that understanding might not have been the point. "I hope not," Dr. Crankworth replied honestly. "Because if they did understand it, then we're dealing with beings whose intelligence is so advanced that they can comprehend nonsense, which is frankly terrifying." Their philosophical discussion was interrupted by the arrival of a new transmission from the alien vessel. Dr. Snodgrass, who had been monitoring communications, looked up from her console with the expression of someone who had just realized that the situation was about to become significantly worse. They're asking us to clarify whether our mathematical response was intended as a demonstration of superior intelligence or as an insult to their intellectual capabilities." The room fell silent, except for the sound of General Bumblebee's mustache twitching with increasing frequency. "Well," said Professor Wobblethwaite after a long moment, "that's a remarkably direct question." "It's also, Doctor," Crankworth added grimly, "a question that we can't answer honestly without either looking like idiots or accidentally insulting beings who probably have advanced weapons." General Bumblebee cleared his throat. "What happens if we tell them the truth? That we were just making stuff up because we had no idea what they wanted?" "According to my research, Doctor," Snodgrass replied, consulting her stack of papers, "honesty in first contact situations is either viewed as refreshing candor or as evidence of primitive simplicity, depending on the cultural context of the receiving species. And we have no idea what their cultural context is? None whatsoever." And the debate that followed would later be studied in diplomatic schools as an example of how reasonable people can talk themselves into completely unreasonable decisions when faced with impossible situations. After 37 minutes of discussion, the human first contact team reached a consensus that was both logical and completely insane. They would tell the aliens exactly what they were thinking. Their response, transmitted with the kind of desperate honesty that usually precedes either breakthrough understanding or complete disaster, read, "We have no idea what we're doing. Your equation was impossible, so we made up our own impossible equation because that seemed fair. We're not trying to insult anyone, we're just confused and doing our best. Also, do you like pizza?" The message that appeared on Querble Fizzlebottom's console was so unexpected that he read it 3 times before his brain would accept that he hadn't hallucinated it. "Captain," he said in a voice that had reached frequencies usually reserved for dolphin communication, they've told us that they're confused and asked if we like pizza." "Pizza?" Admiral Stufflebottom exploded. "What in the name of galactic diplomacy is pizza?" According to our cultural database, Communications Officer Twiddle reported, "Pizza appears to be a circular food item that humans feel very strongly about. Our anthropologists describe it as a flatbread covered with various substances that humans consume with religious enthusiasm." Admiral Stufflebottom stared at this information with the expression of someone who was watching his entire understanding of the universe collapse into tiny pizza-related pieces. They've gone from impossible mathematics to food preferences. It appears so, sir. This is unprecedented. There's nothing in the regulations about how to respond when primitive civilizations transition from intellectual challenges to culinary inquiries. Captain Boomwhiskers, who was beginning to develop what he suspected might be the first recorded case of diplomatic stress disorder, consulted his own manual with the desperate energy of someone looking for a life preserver on a sinking ship. "Sir," he reported, "according to Section 45G, when faced with unprecedented situations, we're authorized to use our best judgment." "Our best judgment," Admiral Stufflebottom repeated, his voice reaching levels that made the ship's computer request that he please modulate his volume. "Captain, our best judgment got us into a situation where aliens are asking us about pizza." This was the precise moment when everything went catastrophically wrong, though later analysis would show that everything had been going catastrophically wrong from the very beginning, and this was simply when everyone finally noticed. The problem, as Quirble Fizzlebottom would later explain to the Galactic Inquiry Board, was that Admiral Stufflebottom had never encountered a situation that couldn't be resolved by following proper procedures. And when faced with the complete absence of applicable procedures, he did what any experienced bureaucrat would do. He invented new procedures on the spot. "Very well," Admiral Stufflebottom declared with the confidence of someone who was about to make the worst decision in galactic diplomatic history. "If these humans want to play games with us, then we'll show them what real intellectual superiority looks like. Prepare the Standard Intelligence Evaluation Protocol." "Sir," Quirble said carefully, "the Standard Intelligence Evaluation Protocol is designed for species that demonstrate basic logical thinking. I'm not sure it's appropriate for beings who transition from impossible mathematics to pizza inquiries." "Nonsense, Fizzlebottom! Intelligence is intelligence. If they can solve our evaluation, they're worthy of diplomatic contact. If they can't, then we'll classify them as a primitive species and move on." The Standard Intelligence Evaluation Protocol, as established by the Galactic Diplomatic Corps in the year 2387, consisted of a series of logical puzzles designed to test basic reasoning abilities. These puzzles had been successfully solved by every intelligent species in the galaxy, from the hyper-logical crystalline entities of Rigel 7 to the chaos-loving probability dancers of the Whirlpool Nebula. What the Galactic Diplomatic Corps had never considered was what would happen when these puzzles were presented to a species that approached logic the way a caffeinated squirrel approaches quantum physics, with enthusiasm, creativity, and absolutely no regard for conventional thinking. The evaluation consisted of 3 problems. The first asked, if container A contains 5 units of blue liquid and container B contains 3 units of red liquid, how many containers do you need to hold 8 units of purple liquid? The second problem stated, a spacecraft travels from point X to point Y in 4 time units. If point Y is 6 distance units from point Z, how long will it take to travel from point X to point Z? The third problem presented, if all globes are bleebs and some bleebs are flirps, what can you conclude about the relationship between globes and flirps? These problems had been carefully designed to test basic logical reasoning, mathematical understanding, and abstract thinking. They were, according to galactic educational standards, perfectly straightforward challenges that any intelligent species should be able to solve within a reasonable time frame. They had not been designed to be encountered by humans. Back on Earth, the first contact team received the new transmission during what Dr. Crankworth would later describe as the brief moment when we thought things might actually work out okay. The 3 problems appeared on their screens with an accompanying message that roughly translated to, Please solve these simple exercises to demonstrate your species' intelligence level. Dr. Crankworth stared at the problems with growing concern. These are actually reasonable questions, she said, sounding slightly disappointed. Professor Wobblethwaite examined the problems with the expression of someone who had been expecting continued insanity and was now faced with disappointing sanity. They're almost boring, aren't they? Wait, General Bumblebee interrupted. Are you saying these are easy? Well, Dr. Crankworth replied, the first one is basic addition, the second one requires more information to solve properly, and the third one is a logic puzzle about made-up categories. They're straightforward enough, but what? But they seem almost insultingly simple after the impossible mathematics we were dealing with earlier. It's like they've gone from asking us to contemplate the nature of existence to asking us to add 2 plus 2. This observation led to a debate that would later be cited in xenopsychology textbooks as an example of how overthinking can transform simple situations into complex disasters. The human team spent 43 minutes analyzing the 3 problems, not because they were difficult, but because they seemed too easy. What if, suggested Dr. Snodgrass, these aren't actually the real questions. What if they're testing whether we're smart enough to realize that the real test is figuring out what the actual test is? Or, Professor Wobblethwaite added enthusiastically, what if the test is whether we're confident enough to give simple answers to simple questions instead of overthinking everything? Or, General Bumblebee contributed with the desperation of someone who was tired of not understanding anything, what if they just want us to solve the damn problems so we can all move on with our lives? The solution they eventually transmitted would later be studied in both diplomatic and psychological contexts as an example of what happens when intelligent people think too hard about straightforward questions. For the first problem, they provided not only the correct answer, 2 containers, but also a detailed explanation of color theory, 3 alternative solutions involving different mixing ratios, and a brief essay on the philosophical implications of combining primary colors. For the second problem, they correctly identified that insufficient information had been provided, then proceeded to offer 17 different possible solutions based on various assumptions about spacecraft capabilities, gravitational effects, and the nature of time itself. For the third problem, they provided the logically correct answer, followed by a comprehensive analysis of categorical relationships, a discussion of the logical fallacies inherent in the problem's structure, and a creative alternative solution that reimagined globs, bleebs, and flirps as musical concepts. When this response appeared on Quirble Fizzlebottom's console, he stared at it for so long that Captain Boomwhiskers began to worry that his diplomatic officer had suffered some sort of mental breakdown. "Fizzlebottom! Fizzlebottom! What's their response?" Quirble looked up slowly, his 3 eyes blinking in sequence like a confused traffic light. "Captain," he said carefully, "they've solved all 3 problems correctly." "Excellent. So they passed the intelligence evaluation. But, sir," Quirble continued, "they've also provided 17 additional solutions, written 3 essays, discussed color theory, and somehow managed to turn logic puzzles into musical concepts." Admiral Stufflebottom, who had been waiting confidently for the humans to demonstrate their primitive intelligence level, felt his certainty crumbling like a cookie in a hurricane. That's not possible. The problems were designed to have single, straightforward answers. Yes, sir, but apparently humans don't believe in single, straightforward answers. What do you mean they don't believe in them? I mean, sir, that they appear to approach every question as if it's the beginning of a larger conversation rather than a problem to be solved. This was the moment when Admiral Stufflebottom made the decision that would later be known as the Stufflebottom Incident in Galactic Diplomatic Corps training materials. Faced with evidence that humans were either far more intelligent than expected or completely insane, he chose to interpret their response in the worst possible way. "They're mocking us," he declared, with the indignation of someone who had just realized that his carefully organized universe contained elements that refused to be organized. No species provides 17 solutions to a simple mathematics problem unless they're deliberately trying to show off. "Sir," Captain Boomwhiskers said carefully, "what if they're just thorough?" "Thorough? Captain, thoroughness is providing complete answers. This is excessive thoroughness. It's thoroughness to the point of insanity. It's aggressive thoroughness." Admiral Stufflebottom began pacing back and forth across the bridge with the sort of purposeful energy that usually precedes spectacularly bad decisions. "They think they're cleverer than us, do they? They think they can dazzle us with their primitive overthinking? Well, we'll show them what real intelligence looks like." "Sir," Quirble said nervously, "what exactly are you planning to show them?" "We're going to give them the Advanced Intelligence Evaluation Protocol." The Advanced Intelligence Evaluation Protocol had never actually been used in a first contact situation. It had been developed for species that had already established diplomatic relations and wanted to demonstrate their intellectual capabilities for cultural exchange purposes. It consisted of problems so complex that they typically required teams of specialists several months to solve. It was absolutely, completely, and utterly inappropriate for a species that had just been asked about pizza. "Sir," Captain Boomwhiskers said, "are you sure that's wise? The advanced protocol is designed for civilizations that have already proven their basic competence." "Captain, these humans have just demonstrated that they refuse to accept simple solutions to simple problems. If they want to play intellectual games, then we'll give them intellectual games they'll never forget." The Advanced Intelligence Evaluation Protocol consisted of a single problem that was considered the ultimate test of logical thinking. A multi-dimensional puzzle that required understanding advanced mathematics, quantum physics, philosophical reasoning, and temporal mechanics simultaneously. It was called the Paradox of Simultaneous Impossibility, and it had been solved exactly twice in galactic history, both times by civilizations that had spent centuries preparing for the challenge. The problem, when translated into terms that humans could understand, asked them to calculate the exact moment when an object could exist and not exist at the same time, while traveling backwards through dimensions that didn't exist, in order to prevent an event that had already happened from happening again without causing the prevention to prevent itself. It was the kind of problem that made experienced mathematicians weep softly and philosophers consider career changes. When the problem appeared on Earth's communication systems, the first contact team stared at it in the sort of profound silence usually reserved for witnessing natural disasters or receiving tax audits. "Well," Dr. Crankworth said finally, "they've escalated." Professor Wobblethwaite read through the problem 3 times, his expression progressing from confusion to amazement to what could only be described as intellectual delight. "This is magnificent," he exclaimed. "It's like someone took every impossible concept in the universe and asked them to have a dance party together." "Can we solve it?" General Bumblebee asked with the tone of someone who was afraid of the answer. "Solve it?" Professor Wobblethwaite laughed. "My dear General, this problem doesn't want to be solved. It wants to be appreciated. It wants to be admired. It wants to be framed and hung on a wall somewhere so that future generations can look at it and say, 'Now that is what I call a proper impossibility.'" Dr. Crankworth, meanwhile, was experiencing what she would later describe as a moment of perfect clarity in an ocean of confusion. She looked at the problem, then at her colleagues, then back at the problem, and suddenly understood exactly what was happening. "They're testing whether we're smart enough to know when we're out of our depth," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" asked Dr. Snodgrass. "I mean," Dr. Crankworth explained, "that this problem is designed to be impossible. They're not expecting us to solve it. They're expecting us to recognize that it can't be solved and respond accordingly. So we should just tell them it's impossible." "No!" Professor Wobblethwaite interrupted with the enthusiasm of someone who had just had a terrible idea. We should do something better than that. What could possibly be better than recognizing an impossible problem? We should solve it anyway. The discussion that followed was later recorded by Dr. Snodgrass for her personal files, where she labeled it the conversation that probably doomed humanity to either greatness or complete disaster. I'm not sure which. The debate lasted exactly 17 minutes and covered topics ranging from the nature of reality to whether it was possible to eat breakfast backwards. In the end, the human first contact team reached a decision that was simultaneously brilliant and completely insane. They would solve the unsolvable problem by changing the rules of what solving meant. Their response, transmitted to the alien vessel with the confidence of people who had completely given up trying to be reasonable, didn't provide a mathematical solution to the paradox of simultaneous impossibility. Instead, it provided something far worse, a practical solution. The humans explained that the problem couldn't be solved using conventional logic, so they had invented unconventional logic specifically for this purpose. They then proceeded to demonstrate their unconventional logic by solving the paradox through the simple expedient of declaring that impossible things were possible if you approached them with the right attitude and sufficient determination. They concluded their response by noting that since the problem asked about preventing something that had already happened, the most efficient solution was to prevent the problem itself from being a problem, which they had just accomplished by solving it in a way that made the original question irrelevant. When this response reached the alien vessel, it had the effect of a small intellectual bomb detonating in the middle of everything Admiral Stufflebottom thought he knew about the universe. Quibble Fizzlebottom read the response 3 times, then handed it to Captain Boomwhiskers, who read it twice, before passing it to Admiral Stufflebottom with the expression of someone delivering news of a natural disaster. Admiral Stufflebottom read the human response once, then again, then a 3rd time, while his understanding of reality underwent what could only be described as aggressive reorganization. They solved it, he whispered. Is that good? Captain Boomwhiskers asked nervously. They solved the unsolvable problem by declaring that unsolvable problems don't have to be unsolvable if you refuse to accept that they're unsolvable. So, is that good or bad? Admiral Stufflebottom looked up from the transmission with the expression of someone who had just realized that everything he thought he knew about intelligence was not only wrong, but had been wrong in ways that he hadn't even known were possible to be wrong. Captain, he said slowly, I think we may have made contact with a species that approaches logic the way a hurricane approaches urban planning. Meaning they don't follow the rules because they don't believe the rules apply to them, and somehow this actually works. This revelation might have led to a peaceful first contact, if not for the fact that Admiral Stufflebottom had spent his entire career believing that the universe operated according to predictable principles, and discovering that humans existed had fundamentally challenged his understanding of how reality was supposed to function. Sir, Quibble said carefully, what should our response be? Admiral Stufflebottom consulted his regulation manual with the desperate energy of someone looking for an instruction manual for dealing with cosmic impossibilities. What he found instead was Section 78D. When primitive civilizations demonstrate abilities that exceed current understanding, immediate escalation to full diplomatic protocols is required. Full diplomatic protocols, Captain Boomwhiskers repeated. Sir, that means we'd have to treat them as equals. According to regulations, Captain, any species that can solve the paradox of simultaneous impossibility is, by definition, intellectually superior to us. But, sir, they didn't really solve it. Captain, they solved it by changing what solving means. Do you realize what that implies? That they're creative? that they're so far beyond our understanding of intelligence that they can redefine reality to suit their convenience. This was the moment when Admiral Stufflebottom made the second decision that would later be studied in diplomatic schools as an example of how fear can transform successful bureaucrats into catastrophic decision-makers. Faced with evidence that humans might be far more advanced than expected, he decided that the safest course of action was to treat them as a potential threat. "Fizzlebottom," he ordered, "transmit the formal diplomatic challenge." "Sir," Quirble replied nervously, "the formal diplomatic challenge is reserved for species that demonstrate hostile intent. They've just demonstrated that they can solve impossible problems by refusing to acknowledge that they're impossible. If that's not a demonstration of potentially dangerous capabilities, then I don't know what is. The formal diplomatic challenge, as established by the Galactic Diplomatic Corps, was designed to be the final test of a species' intentions. It presented them with a scenario that required them to choose between demonstrating peaceful cooperation or revealing aggressive tendencies. The challenge was carefully worded to make peaceful cooperation the obviously correct choice, while making aggressive responses seem foolish and counterproductive. The scenario presented to Earth was deceptively simple. Your species has been offered membership in a galactic community that values peace, cooperation, and mutual understanding. However, this community has rules that all members must follow. Are you willing to accept these rules, or do you believe your species should be exempt from the standards that govern civilized behavior? It was, according to diplomatic theory, impossible to answer this question in a way that would be interpreted as hostile unless a species was genuinely committed to aggressive behavior. What Admiral Stufflebottom had not considered was that humans had a unique talent for finding the one response to any question that nobody had thought to prepare for. On Earth, the first contact team received the formal diplomatic challenge during what Dr. Snodgrass would later describe as the brief period when we thought we might actually be getting the hang of this alien communication thing. The question appeared on their screens, accompanied by what the translation software identified as a message of significant formal importance, which immediately put everyone on edge, because formal importance sounded like the kind of thing that could lead to interplanetary incidents if handled incorrectly. Dr. Crankworth read the challenge aloud to the assembled team, her voice carrying the particular tone that people use when they suspect they're about to step on a diplomatic landmine. "So," General Bumblebee said after a moment of contemplative silence, "they want to know if we're willing to follow their rules." "It seems straightforward enough," Dr. Snodgrass agreed. "We say yes, we join their community, everyone gets along nicely." Professor Wobblethwaite, however, was frowning at the message with the expression of someone who smelled something suspicious. "Wait," he said slowly, "has anyone else noticed that they're asking us to agree to follow rules that they haven't actually told us about?" This observation hit the room like a small intellectual meteorite. Everyone stared at the message again and slowly began to realize that Professor Wobblethwaite was absolutely right. "They want us to commit to following unspecified rules?" Dr. Crankworth asked, her voice rising to frequencies that made the coffee machine whimper in sympathy. "It appears so," Professor Wobblethwaite confirmed. "They're essentially asking us to sign a blank contract." General Bumblebee's mustache began twitching with increasing velocity. "That seems problematic." "Problematic!" Dr. Crankworth exclaimed. "General, they're asking us to agree to unknown restrictions on behalf of our entire species. What if their rules include something like all new members must sacrifice their firstborn children to the cosmic potato god, or Tuesday is now illegal?" This led to a discussion that would later be cited in negotiation textbooks as an example of how reasonable people can talk themselves into taking unreasonable positions when faced with unreasonable requests. After 26 minutes of debate, the human first contact team reached a consensus that was both logical and diplomatically catastrophic. They would ask to see the rules before agreeing to follow them. Their response, transmitted with the confidence of people who thought they were being perfectly reasonable, read, "We appreciate your invitation to join your galactic community. However, before we can commit to following your rules, we'd like to know what those rules actually are. Could you please provide us with a complete list of regulations, restrictions, and requirements? Also, do any of these rules involve Tuesday? We're particularly fond of Tuesday and would hate to give it up." When this message appeared on Quirble Fizzlebottom's console, he experienced what his species called bureaucratic shock syndrome, which manifested as an inability to process information that didn't fit into pre-existing categories. "Captain," he said in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a very deep well, They've asked to review the regulations before agreeing to follow them." Admiral Stufflebottom, who had been confidently waiting for the humans to demonstrate either peaceful compliance or obvious hostility, felt his expectations crumble like a sandcastle in a hurricane. "They want to review the regulations?" "Yes, sir. They've also asked specifically about Tuesday." "Tuesday? What does Tuesday have to do with galactic diplomacy?" "I'm not entirely sure, sir, but they appear to have strong feelings about it." Admiral Stufflebottom consulted his manual with the frantic energy of someone looking for instructions on how to deal with beings who insisted on reading the fine print. What he discovered was that no species in galactic history had ever asked to review the community rules before accepting membership. "This is unprecedented," he declared. "Species are supposed to accept community membership as an honor. They're not supposed to treat it like a contract." "What should we do, sir?" Captain Boomwhiskers asked. Admiral Stufflebottom flipped through his manual with increasing desperation. "According to Section 94C, when species make unreasonable demands during the formal diplomatic challenge, we're authorized to interpret this as evidence of hostile intent." "Sir," Quirble said nervously, "is asking to read the rules really an unreasonable demand?" "Fizzlebottom, the rules of galactic community membership are 47,000 pages long and cover everything from interstellar trade regulations to proper etiquette for addressing crystalline life forms. No species could possibly review them in a reasonable time frame. So we're supposed to ask people to agree to 47,000 pages of rules without reading them? That's how it's always been done, Fizzlebottom. It's called trust. This might have led to a productive discussion about the nature of informed consent in interstellar relations, if not for the arrival of Emergency Communication Protocol Message 1240 Urgent, which appeared on the ship's communication system with the sort of electronic screaming that indicated cosmic-level importance. The message was from Galactic Command, and it was brief, direct, and absolutely terrifying. "Admiral Stufflebottom, stop first contact taking too long, stop complete evaluation immediately, stop mission success required for career advancement, stop failure not acceptable, stop that is all stop." Admiral Stufflebottom stared at this message with the expression of someone who had just realized that his entire future was hanging by a thread, and that thread was being held by beings who asked peculiar questions about Tuesday. "Fizzlebottom," he said in a voice that carried the particular strain that comes from having one's back against the cosmic wall, "how long have we been conducting this first contact?" 2 hours and 57 minutes, sir." "And according to Galactic Command, how long should first contact take?" "Standard protocol allows for 3 hours maximum, sir." Admiral Stufflebottom looked at his chronometer, then at the human transmission, then at his regulation manual, and made the decision that would later be known in diplomatic circles as the 3-minute solution to a 3-hour problem. "Very well," he announced with the confidence of someone who was about to solve everything through the simple expedient of following regulations more aggressively. "If these humans want to play games with us, We'll show them what happens when they play games with the Galactic Diplomatic Corps. Sir, Captain Boomwhisker said carefully, what exactly are you planning to do? Captain, according to Emergency Protocol 77X, when first contact exceeds maximum time allowance and the species demonstrates potentially hostile behavior, we're authorized to use the accelerated resolution process. The accelerated resolution process had been developed for situations where diplomacy had failed and immediate action was required to protect galactic security. It consisted of a simple, direct challenge. Species that could demonstrate their peaceful intentions within a specified time limit would be welcomed into the galactic community, while species that failed the challenge would be classified as hostile and dealt with accordingly. The time limit was 3 minutes. Sir, Quirble said, his voice reaching frequencies that made the ship's computer ask if someone needed medical assistance. Are you planning to give humans 3 minutes to prove they're not hostile? Exactly, Fizzlebottom. It's perfect. Either they'll demonstrate peaceful cooperation by accepting our reasonable demands, or they'll reveal their true hostile nature by refusing to comply. But, sir, what if they're just confused? Fizzlebottom, after 3 hours of dealing with impossible mathematics, pizza inquiries, and requests to review 47,000 pages of regulations, I think we can safely assume that confusion is their natural state. The accelerated resolution process challenge was transmitted to Earth with the sort of formal authority that usually accompanied declarations of war or announcements of cosmic significance. The message was clear, direct, and absolutely terrifying. Final diplomatic challenge. Stop. You have 3 minutes to demonstrate peaceful intentions. Stop. Failure to comply will result in classification as hostile species. Stop. Respond immediately. Stop. On Earth, this message appeared during what Dr. Crankworth would later describe as the exact moment when we thought we might actually be making progress. The first contact team stared at the transmission in the sort of profound silence that usually precedes either enlightenment or complete panic. In this case, it was definitely leaning toward the latter. 3 minutes, Dr. Snodgrass whispered. They want us to prove we're peaceful in 3 minutes? How? General Bumblebee asked, with the tone of someone who was watching his military career flash before his eyes. Do you prove you're peaceful in 3 minutes? Professor Wobblethwaite was bouncing up and down with the sort of manic energy that usually indicates either breakthrough thinking or complete mental breakdown. This is fascinating, he exclaimed. They've essentially asked us to provide evidence of a negative within an impossibly short time frame. Is that good or bad? Dr. Crankworth demanded. It's impossible. You can't prove you're not hostile in 3 minutes. It's like asking someone to prove they're not thinking about elephants. So, what do we do? This was the moment when General Bumblebee, whose entire military career had been built on the principle that decisive action was better than prolonged indecision, made the decision that would later be studied in both military and diplomatic academies as an example of how sometimes the most obvious solution is also the most effective one. We do exactly what they asked, he announced, with the sort of calm authority that comes from having given up trying to understand the situation and deciding to just deal with it directly. Which is what, exactly? Dr. Crankworth asked. We demonstrate that we're peaceful. How? General Bumblebee looked around the room at his fellow team members, then at the communication console, then back at his colleagues with the expression of someone who had just realized that the solution to their problem was so simple that it was stupid. We surrender, he said. The silence that followed this statement was the sort of profound quiet that usually accompanies either moments of great wisdom or spectacular stupidity, and nobody was entirely sure which this was. We surrender, Dr. Snodgrass repeated slowly. Think about it, General Bumblebee explained, with the enthusiasm of someone who had just solved a puzzle that had been bothering him for hours. They want proof that we're not hostile. What could be more non-hostile than complete, immediate, unconditional surrender? But General, Professor Wobblethwaite protested, we're not actually at war with them. Exactly. We're surrendering a war that doesn't exist to beings who haven't attacked us. It's the most peaceful thing possible. The response that Earth transmitted to the alien vessel was later studied in military academies as an example of how creative thinking can transform impossible situations into merely unprecedented ones. The message read, "We formally surrender to your superior civilization and request mercy for our primitive confusion. We acknowledge your authority and submit to whatever judgment you deem appropriate. Please don't destroy our planet. We promise to be good. P.S. We still really like Tuesday, but we're willing to negotiate." Agreed. When this message appeared on Admiral Stufflebottom's communication console, it had the effect of a small, diplomatic nuclear bomb detonating in the middle of his understanding of how first contact was supposed to work. They've surrendered," he announced to the bridge crew, in a voice that suggested he wasn't entirely sure what the words meant anymore. "Is that good?" Captain Boomwhiskers asked hopefully. I don't know," Admiral Stufflebottom replied, flipping frantically through his regulation manual. "There's nothing in the protocols about species surrendering during first contact. They're supposed to either demonstrate peaceful cooperation or reveal hostile intentions. They're not supposed to give up." "So, what do we do now, sir?" Admiral Stufflebottom stared at the human transmission, then at his manual, then at his chronometer, which showed that exactly 3 minutes had passed since the accelerated resolution process had been initiated. "According to regulations," he said slowly, "species that demonstrate complete non-hostility within the specified time limit are to be classified as peaceful but primitive and offered limited community membership. So, we won? I think they won by losing completely." This was the precise moment when Admiral Stufflebottom realized that humans had somehow managed to pass every single test by approaching them in ways that nobody had ever thought to prepare for. They had solved impossible mathematics by changing what solving meant, demonstrated intelligence by overthinking simple problems, and proven their peaceful nature by surrendering to beings who weren't actually fighting them. "Sir," Quirble said carefully, "what should our official response be?" Admiral Stufflebottom looked at the human surrender message, then at his regulation manual, then at his career prospects, and made the decision that would later be remembered in galactic history as either a moment of diplomatic brilliance or complete bureaucratic surrender. "Fizzle bottom," he announced, with the sort of formal authority that people use when they want to sound official while having no idea what they're doing. "Prepare the standard welcome package for new community members." "Sir, should I include the 47,000 pages of regulations they asked about?" "No, absolutely not. If we give them the regulations, they'll probably ask questions about them, and I don't think any of us are prepared for what kind of questions humans ask about regulations. So we're welcoming them to the galactic community without telling them what the rules are. Fizzlebottom, after 3 hours of dealing with these beings, I'm convinced that telling them the rules would only encourage them to find creative ways to follow them that nobody has thought of yet." The message that Earth received 23 minutes later was brief, formal, and absolutely baffling. "Congratulations, stop. You have been accepted into the galactic community. Stop welcome package will arrive shortly. Stop. Please continue being exactly as peaceful as you currently are. Stop. Do not change anything about your approach to logic. Stop. That is all. Stop." Dim. When this message appeared on Earth's communication systems, the first contact team stared at it in the sort of stunned silence that usually follows either great victories or great disasters. Did we just accidentally join an interstellar civilization?" Dr. Crankworth asked. "I think so," General Bumblebee replied, "by surrendering to them, without knowing what their rules are. Apparently they don't want us to know what their rules are." Professor Wobblethwaite was reading the message over and over again with the expression of someone who was trying to solve a puzzle that kept changing shape. "They're telling us not to change our approach to logic," he observed. "That suggests they think our approach to logic is somehow special." "Special how?" Dr. Snodgrass asked. "I'm not sure, but considering that we've spent the last 3 hours confusing them at every turn, I suspect they think we're either far more advanced than we actually are, or so primitive that we're unpredictable. Which is it? I have absolutely no idea, and I don't think they do either." 6 months later, Dr. Millicent Crankworth was sitting in her office at the newly established Earth Office of Interstellar Relations, reading the latest communication from what humans had come to call the galactic bureaucracy. The message was typical of what they'd been receiving ever since first contact, formally polite, slightly nervous, and obviously written by beings who were still trying to figure out how to deal with humans. "Dr. Crankworth," the message read, "we are pleased to report that your species continues to exceed all expectations for peaceful behavior. Your recent proposal to solve interstellar trade disputes through rock, paper, scissors tournaments has been implemented in 3-star systems with remarkable success. We are still trying to understand how this works, but it appears to be more effective than our previous methods. Please continue doing whatever it is you're doing. Also, the Cosmic Council has officially declared Tuesday to be a protected concept throughout the galaxy, as requested. We're not sure why this was important to you, but we didn't want to risk finding out what would happen if we refused." Dr. Crankworth smiled as she read this, remembering the chaos of that first contact day. Humans had stumbled into galactic civilization by being completely, authentically themselves, which apparently was so unprecedented that the rest of the galaxy didn't know how to respond, except by treating them with nervous respect. The truth, as she had gradually come to understand, was that most galactic civilizations had become so focused on following proper procedures that they had forgotten how to think creatively about problems. Humans, with their talent for approaching every situation as if the rules were merely suggestions, had accidentally revolutionized interstellar relations by refusing to be limited by conventional thinking. The war that had lasted 3 minutes hadn't been a war at all. It had been the moment when the galaxy realized that there were beings in the universe who could solve problems by changing what the problems meant, and who could win conflicts by surrendering so completely that victory became meaningless. And in a universe where every other species had spent thousands of years learning how to follow the rules, humans had become valuable precisely because they had never learned that the rules were supposed to matter more than the results. Dr. Crankworth put down the communication and looked out her window at a world that was still trying to understand its place, in a galaxy that was still trying to understand humans. She smiled, thinking about how first contact had lasted exactly 3 hours. The war had lasted exactly 3 minutes, and the confusion was probably going to last forever. Because in the end, humans had joined the galactic community not by proving they were smart enough to follow the rules, but by demonstrating that they were creative enough to make the rules irrelevant. And in a universe full of species who had forgotten how to be surprised, being irrelevantly creative turned out to be the most valuable trait of all. The most remarkable thing about the whole situation, Dr. Crankworth reflected, was that it had worked out perfectly by working out in ways that nobody had thought to plan for. Which was, she suspected, probably the most human solution possible to the problem of making first contact with beings who expected everything to go according to plan. After all, she thought, as she returned to her paperwork, why solve problems the normal way when you could solve them in ways that made everyone involved question what solving meant in the first place?